Hey, what's going on everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Today's story is one I've been wanting to cover for a while now, and I gotta be honest with you, this one's different. We've talked about a lot of cases on this channel, some scary, some sad, some just straight up bizarre, but this one messed with me, because it's not about a monster hiding in the shadows. It's about a monster hiding in plain sight. Someone who smiled at his neighbors, who lived a quiet life in a quiet town, who seemed completely normal, until one 911 call changed everything. The title of today's story is, We Received a 911 Call. What we saw inside. That house still haunts me. This is a first-hand account from a retired police officer who responded to what he thought was a routine welfare check. What he found inside that house, let's just say, it raised questions that still don't have answers. So here's what I need you to do. Get comfortable. Turn off the distractions. Maybe don't watch this one alone if you're easily creeped out. And if at any point during this video you find yourself thinking, no way, that can't be real. Trust me, I thought the same thing. Let's get into it. This account comes from a retired police officer. I'm not going to use his real name. He asked me not to, so let's just call him Officer Mike. Mike spent 23 years on the force in a small suburb in Ohio, the kind of town where everyone knows everyone, the kind of place where the biggest crime of the week is usually some teenager mailbox baseball or a noise complaint about a backyard barbecue that went too late. Mike thought he had seen it all. Domestic disputes, drunk drivers, the occasional drug bust. Nothing glamorous, but real police work nonetheless. He was 2 years away from retirement when this happened. 2 years away from a pension, a fishing boat, and never having to wear that uniform again. And then he got a call, a simple welfare check, the kind of call he had answered 100 times before. Except this time, that call would change everything he thought he knew about the people living right next door. Some calls you forget before your shift ends. You write up the report, you file the paperwork, and by the time you're eating dinner with your family, it's already out of your head. That's most calls. That's 99% of the job. But then there's that other 1%. The calls that follow you home. The calls that sit with you at the dinner table. The calls that are still there when you close your eyes at night, waiting for you in the dark. This was one of those calls. Mike told me that he's tried to forget it. He really has. He went to therapy. He talked to his wife. He even considered moving to a different state just to put some distance between himself and that house. But here's the thing about memories like this, they don't care about distance. They don't care about time. They're always there, lurking in the back of your mind, ready to surface when you least expect it. And now, after all these years, Mike decided it was time to share it. When Mike first reached out to me, he was hesitant. I could hear it in his voice. There was this long pause before he even started talking, like he was debating whether to hang up and pretend he never called. And I get it. Some stories are hard to tell. Some stories feel too personal, too raw, too close to home. But Mike said something that stuck with me. He said, I've told this story maybe 3 times in my life, twice to therapists, and now to you. And when he said that, I knew this was going to be different. This wasn't some guy looking for attention or trying to promote a book. This was a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time. And he was finally ready to put it down. So I told him to take his time. Start from the beginning. Don't leave anything out. And what he told me over the next 2 hours, I'm about to share with you right now. Every detail, every moment, exactly as he described it. Before we get into the story itself, I need to set some expectations here. This isn't going to be your typical true crime video where I just read off facts and dates and names like a Wikipedia article. No. What you're about to hear is a personal account. Mike's words, Mike's perspective, Mike's emotions. You're going to feel like you're right there with him, stepping into that house for the first time. And I need to warn you, some of what you're about to hear might be disturbing. Not because it's gory or violent, but because of what it implies. Because the scariest monsters aren't the ones covered in blood with a knife in their hand. The scariest monsters are the ones who smile at you across the fence. The ones who wave at you when you're getting your mail. The ones who blend in so perfectly that you'd never suspect a thing. That's the kind of monster we're dealing with today. And by the end of this video, you're going to look at the world a little differently. I guarantee it. Here's what I can tell you without giving too much away. In October of 2019, Mike responded to a 911 call about a strange smell coming from a house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The caller was an elderly woman who lived next door. She hadn't seen her neighbor in over 2 weeks and was getting worried. Seemed straightforward enough, right? Probably just an older guy who passed away in his sleep and nobody noticed. Happens more often than you'd think. Mike expected to find exactly that. A sad, lonely death that would be wrapped up before the end of his shift. But what he found instead was something that would unravel a 14-year-old mystery. A mystery involving stolen identities, a missing person from Florida, and a secret hidden in the basement that raised more questions than it answered. And the worst part? The man who held all the answers died before anyone could ask him a single question. So here's what I need you to do right now. If you're watching this in bed, sit up. If you're doing something else while you listen, stop. Give me your full attention for the next 20 minutes, because this story deserves it. Mike deserves it. And honestly, you deserve to hear it properly. I'm going to walk you through everything, step by step, exactly as it happened. From the moment that 911 call came in, to the moment Mike realized that nothing about this case was what it seemed. There will be twists. There will be moments where you're going to want to pause and process what you just heard. And by the end, you're going to understand why this story has haunted Mike for years. Why he still drives past that house sometimes, just staring at it. Why he's never looked at his neighbors the same way again. Alright, enough build-up. Let's get into it. This is the story of a man who lived a lie for 14 years and the 911 call that finally exposed the truth. It was a Tuesday night, October 15th, 2019. Mike remembers the exact date because it was the same week his daughter was coming home from college for fall break. He was already thinking about the weekend, about firing up the grill, maybe catching a football game together. Normal stuff, dad stuff. The kind of thoughts that keep you grounded during the long night shift. His shift started at 10 p.m., same as always. 2,200 hours if you want to get technical about it. The station was quiet when he clocked in. A few guys playing cards in the break room, someone watching a rerun of some cop show on the old TV in the corner. Mike always found that funny. Cops watching cop shows, pointing out everything Hollywood gets wrong. He grabbed his coffee, checked his gear, and headed out to his patrol car. Just another Tuesday. Just another shift. Nothing about that night felt special or different in any way. But isn't that always how it goes? The nights that change your life never announce themselves. Mike's patrol route covered the eastern side of town. Mostly residential, a few small businesses, nothing too exciting. The kind of beat that veteran cops either love or hate. No middle ground. Some guys want the action, the chases, the adrenaline. They want to feel like they're in a movie every night. But Mike wasn't that guy. Not anymore, anyway. After 20-plus years on the force, he appreciated the quiet shifts. The ones where the biggest problem was a raccoon getting into someone's trash or a teenager out past curfew. Those were the good nights. The nights where everyone went home safe and nobody had to write a report longer than half a page. October was usually like that. The summer craziness had died down, kids were back in school, and it was too cold for people to be hanging around outside causing trouble. Mike figured this Tuesday would be no different. He'd do his rounds, maybe grab a burger from the drive-thru around midnight, and coast into Wednesday morning without incident. For the first few hours, that's exactly how it went. Mike drove his usual route, checking in on the spots that sometimes attracted trouble. The parking lot behind the old hardware store, empty. The park where kids like to drink on weekends, quiet. The intersection near the highway where speeders like to blow through the red light, nothing. He listened to the radio chatter, mostly routine stuff. A noise complaint on the west side, a fender bender near the grocery store, someone's car alarm that wouldn't stop going off. The kind of calls that make up 90% of police work but never make it into the TV shows. Mike was actually starting to get a little bored, which in his experience was always a good sign. Boring meant safe. Boring meant predictable. Boring meant he could let his mind wander a little bit. Think about that weekend with his daughter, maybe start planning what he was going to cook. He had no idea that in less than an hour, boring would become a distant memory. The call came in at 12:47 a.m. Mike remembers looking at the clock on his dashboard right before he picked up the radio. Dispatch came through with that flat, professional tone they always use. Unit 7. We have a welfare check requested at 1422 Maple Ridge Drive. Caller reports a strange odor coming from the residence. Neighbor states she hasn't seen the homeowner in approximately 2 weeks. Mike acknowledged the call and plugged the address into his GPS. Maple Ridge Drive. He knew that area. Nice neighborhood, quiet street, mostly older folks who had lived there for decades. The kind of street where people still decorated for every holiday and actually talked to their neighbors. A welfare check in that area usually meant one thing: someone elderly had passed away in their home and nobody noticed until the smell gave it away. Sad, but not uncommon. Mike had handled maybe a dozen of those calls throughout his career. Now, I need to pause here for a second because I think it's important you understand what a welfare check actually means in police work. It's not glamorous. It's not exciting. Basically, someone calls 911 because they're worried about a person, usually a neighbor, sometimes a family member, and they want the police to go check on them, make sure they're okay. Most of the time, it's nothing. The person went on vacation and forgot to tell anyone. Or they've been sick in bed and just haven't felt like answering the door. Or, in sadder cases, they've passed away. That was Mike's assumption here. Elderly neighborhood, person not seen for 2 weeks, strange smell coming from the house. The math wasn't hard to do. He figured he'd get there, confirm what happened, call the coroner, do the paperwork, and move on with his night. A sad ending to someone's story, but not the kind of thing that keeps you up at night. At least, that's what he thought. The drive to Maple Ridge took about 12 minutes. Mike wasn't in any rush. If the guy was already dead, another few minutes wasn't going to make a difference. He used the time to mentally prepare himself. Death scenes are never pleasant, especially when decomposition is involved. The smell is something you never really get used to, no matter how many times you encounter it. It gets into your clothes, your hair, your car. Some cops keep a jar of Vicks VapoRub in their glove box to dab under their nose, but Mike never liked that trick. He preferred to just breathe through his mouth and get it over with. As he turned onto Maple Ridge Drive, he noticed how peaceful everything looked. Porch lights glowing warmly, leaves scattered on well-maintained lawns, the occasional Halloween decorations starting to pop up. It was the picture of suburban tranquility. The kind of street you'd see in a movie about the American dream. Mike had no idea that behind one of those peaceful facades, a nightmare had been hiding for 14 years. He pulled up to 1422 and parked along the curb. The house was at the end of the street, slightly set back from the others. 2-story, beige siding, a neatly trimmed lawn that was just starting to get a little overgrown. There was a car in the driveway, an older sedan, nothing fancy, which told Mike the homeowner probably hadn't left town. The porch light was off, but that wasn't unusual for after midnight. What was unusual was that every single curtain in the house appeared to be drawn shut. Front windows, side windows, even the small window above the garage door. Complete blackout. Mike made a mental note of that, but didn't think too much of it at the time. Some people are just private. As he stepped out of his patrol car, that's when it hit him. The smell. Even from the curb, a good 30 feet from the front door, he could detect it. Faint, but unmistakable. The sweet, sickly odor of decay. His suspicions were confirmed. Someone in that house was dead. You do this job long enough, you think you've seen it all. You think nothing can surprise you anymore. You develop this armor, this emotional distance that lets you walk into the worst situations and still function like a professional. Mike had that armor. 23 years of building it up, layer by layer, call by call. He thought he was bulletproof at this point. Just 2 years from retirement, coasting toward the finish line, counting down the days until he could trade his badge for a fishing rod. But here's the thing about that armor. It's not as strong as you think it is. And the universe has a funny way of testing it when you least expect. Standing there on that quiet suburban street, smelling death in the air, Mike had no idea what he was about to walk into. He thought this was going to be routine. A sad situation, sure, but routine. That's exactly when the job reminds you you haven't seen anything yet. Before Mike approached the house, he took a moment to look around the neighborhood. Force of habit, really. After 2 decades on the job, you learn to assess your surroundings before doing anything else. Maple Ridge Drive was exactly what you'd expect from a street with that name. Tree-lined sidewalks, well-kept lawns, houses that all looked slightly different, but somehow exactly the same. The kind of neighborhood where people put up Christmas lights in early December and actually take them down by mid-January. Where kids ride their bikes in the summer and nobody worries about them being out until dark. Mike had grown up in a place like this, back in Indiana. He knew these streets, these people, this way of life, safe, predictable, boring, even. The kind of place where the most exciting thing that happens all year is when someone paints their front door an unusual color and the HOA sends a strongly worded letter. The kind of place where nothing ever happens. Until, of course, something does. The house at 1422 fit right in with the rest of the street. 2 stories, beige siding that probably needed a fresh coat of paint but wasn't quite there yet. A lawn that showed signs of recent neglect, grass a bit too long, a few weeds poking through the flower beds, but nothing that screamed abandoned. The driveway had a single car parked in it, an older Honda Accord, probably early 2000s model. Gray, practical, forgettable. The kind of car you see 100 times a day and never notice. There was a mailbox at the end of the driveway, and even from where Mike stood, he could see it was overflowing. Newspapers, letters, flyers, all stuffed in and spilling out onto the ground below. That was a bad sign. Not definitive, but bad. It meant whoever lived here hadn't collected their mail in a while. Combined with the smell, combined with the neighbor's concern, the picture was starting to come together. And it wasn't a pretty one. As Mike walked up the driveway, he kept his eyes on the windows. Every single one of them had the curtains drawn. Not just closed, but sealed. Like whoever lived there didn't want a single ray of light getting in or out. The front porch had a welcome mat that said, "Home Sweet Home" in faded letters, probably bought years ago and never replaced. There was a planter next to the door with dead flowers in it, brown and withered, clearly not watered in weeks. A small detail, but Mike noticed it. He noticed everything. That's what 23 years of police work does to you. You become hyper-aware of the little things, the details that most people overlook. The dead flowers told a story. Someone who once cared enough to plant them, to try to make the entrance look nice, but then stopped caring, or couldn't care anymore. Mike stepped onto the porch and the wooden boards creaked under his weight. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the silence. And speaking of silence, that was the other thing that struck him. This was a residential neighborhood in the middle of the night, so yeah, you'd expect it to be quiet. But this was a different kind of quiet, an unnatural quiet. No crickets chirping, no dogs barking in the distance, no hum of a television from inside the house. Just absolute, suffocating stillness. Mike had experienced this before at other death scenes. It was like the house itself knew what was inside and was holding its breath. He shook off the feeling and approached the front door. Standard procedure. Knock first, announce yourself, see if anyone responds. He rapped his knuckles against the wood, 3 firm knocks. Police department. Welfare check. Is anyone home? His voice echoed off the empty porch and disappeared into the night. No response. He tried again, louder this time. Police department. We received a call about this residence. I need someone to come to the door. Nothing. The house remained silent, indifferent, keeping its secrets. The smell was getting stronger now. Standing on that porch, just a few feet from the front door, Mike could no longer pretend it was faint or ambiguous. It was the unmistakable odor of decomposition, and it was coming from inside. He tried the door handle. Locked. No surprise there. He peered through the small window next to the door, but the curtains were drawn so tightly he couldn't see a thing. Not even a sliver of light from inside. Mike stepped back and considered his options. He could call for backup, wait for someone to bring a key or authorization to force entry. That was the by-the-book approach. But the smell told him everything he needed to know. Someone in there was dead, probably had been for a while, and every minute he waited was another minute of delay for the coroner and the family notification. He decided to check the back of the house first, see if there was another way in. It was a decision that, looking back, would change the entire course of his night. Mike walked around the side of the house, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The side yard was narrow, just a strip of grass between this house and the neighbor's fence. He noticed the windows on this side were also covered, curtains, blinds, even what looked like cardboard on one of them. That was unusual. People who cover their windows with cardboard are usually hiding something or hiding from something. Mike filed that observation away and kept moving. The backyard was larger than he expected, enclosed by a 6-foot wooden fence that gave it complete privacy from the neighbors. There was a small patio with a rusted grill that looked like it hadn't been used in years, a couple of lawn chairs with faded cushions, and a back door leading into what was probably the kitchen. The door had a window in it, but, of course, it was covered from the inside. Mike tried the handle, fully expecting it to be locked like the front. It wasn't. The handle turned easily, and the door swung open with a soft creak. Mike froze. In over 2 decades of police work, he had learned to pay attention when something didn't add up. And this? This didn't add up at all. The front door was locked. The windows were all sealed, but the back door, completely hidden from the street, accessible only through a fenced backyard. That door was unlocked? Why? If someone was paranoid enough to cover every window in their house, why would they leave the back door open? Mike's hand moved instinctively to his holster. He didn't draw his weapon, not yet, but he wanted it ready. The smell was overwhelming now, pouring out of the open doorway like a physical presence. Whatever was in there had been dead for a while. But suddenly, Mike wasn't so sure this was going to be a simple case of natural causes. I remember standing at that back door, hand on my holster, and I had this feeling, you know when your gut tells you something before your brain catches up? When every instinct in your body is screaming at you to pay attention, even though you can't explain why. That was this moment. Mike stood at the threshold of that house, the darkness inside seeming to swallow the beam of his flashlight. Behind him, the quiet suburban neighborhood slept peacefully, completely unaware of what was about to be discovered. In front of him, the unknown waited. He took a breath, through his mouth, not his nose, and stepped inside. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and just like that, Mike was alone in the house of a dead man. A man he thought he would understand. A man who would turn out to be something else entirely. But he didn't know that yet. Right now, he was just a cop doing his job, walking into what he assumed was a routine death scene. He had no idea he was about to walk into a lie that had been living and breathing for 14 years. The first thing Mike noticed when he stepped inside was how clean everything was. Not just tidy, immaculate. The kitchen he entered through looked like it belonged in a showroom. Countertops wiped down to a shine, no dishes in the sink, no crumbs on the floor. The appliances were older models but spotless, like someone had spent hours scrubbing every surface. There was a dish towel hanging from the oven handle, folded into a perfect rectangle. A fruit bowl on the counter with 3 wax apples arranged in a triangle. Mike swept his flashlight across the room, taking it all in. Something about this level of cleanliness felt wrong. Not wrong like a crime scene, wrong like a stage set. Like someone had carefully arranged everything to look like a normal kitchen, but had never actually cooked a meal in it. The smell of death hung heavy in the air, creating a jarring contrast with the pristine surroundings. How could something so clean contain something so rotten? Mike moved through the kitchen into the dining area. Same story here. A wooden table with 4 chairs, all perfectly aligned. A centerpiece in the middle. Some kind of dried flower arrangement, probably bought from a craft store years ago. Placemats set at each seat, even though it was obvious no one had eaten here in a long time. And that's when he saw the food. On one of the placemats sat a plate with what had once been a meal. It was hard to tell what it was now. The decomposition had turned it into a gray, moldy mass, but Mike could make out the shape of what might have been meat and vegetables. Next to the plate was a glass of water, half empty, with a film of dust on the surface. Silverware laid out beside the plate, knife and fork in the proper positions. Whoever had sat down for this meal had never finished it. They had gotten up, walked away, and never came back. The food had just been sitting there for weeks, rotting alongside its owner. The living room was adjacent to the dining area, and Mike stepped into it with his flashlight raised. Immediately, he noticed the television. It was on, casting a pale blue glow across the room, but the sound was muted. Some kind of news channel, by the look of it. The anchor's mouth was moving, images flashing across the screen, but not a single sound reached Mike's ears. Just that eerie, flickering light playing against the walls. How long had that TV been running? 2 weeks? 3? The electric bill must have been astronomical, but apparently no one had been around to notice. Mike found the remote on the coffee table, also perfectly positioned, and made a mental note not to touch anything. This was still potentially a crime scene, even if his gut told him it was probably natural causes. The TV being on suggested the death was sudden. The person hadn't planned to die, hadn't had time to turn it off before whatever happened. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, Mike started to take in more details of the living room. A couch with decorative pillows arranged symmetrically. A bookshelf with books that looked like they had never been opened, their spines perfectly intact. A coffee table with a few magazines fanned out in a precise pattern, the kind of arrangement you see in a dentist's waiting room. Everything matched. The colors, the textures, the placement. It was almost too coordinated, like someone had hired an interior decorator to create the illusion of a lived-in space. But there was something missing. Mike couldn't put his finger on it at first, but as he scanned the room, it hit him. There was no personality here, no quirks, no oddities, no signs that an actual human being with actual tastes and preferences had ever inhabited this space. It was generic in a way that felt intentional, designed to look normal, designed to avoid attention. That's when Mike noticed the photographs on the wall. There were about a dozen of them, arranged in a neat grid pattern above the couch. He walked closer, shining his flashlight on each one. The same man appeared in every photo. Middle-aged, average build, graying hair, forgettable face. The kind of face you see in a crowd and immediately forget. In one photo, he stood in front of the Grand Canyon. In another, he was at some kind of beach resort. Another showed him at what looked like a local fair, holding a stick of cotton candy. Normal vacation photos, the kind anyone might have, but something about them was off. It took Mike a moment to realize what it was. In every single photograph, the man was alone. Not a single other person appeared in any of the images. No friends, no family, no random strangers in the background. Just him by himself, posing in front of various landmarks. Who takes that many vacation photos completely alone? Here's the thing about fake. You don't notice it at first. Your brain sees what it expects to see. A house, a living room, photographs on the wall. Normal stuff. It's only when you really look, when you start paying attention to the details, that you realize something is wrong. Nothing here feels real. The furniture looks like it was bought as a set and never rearranged. The books look like they were purchased by the yard, chosen for their spines rather than their contents. The photographs look like they were selected from a stock image catalog, not captured from actual memories. Mike had been in hundreds of homes throughout his career. Happy homes, sad homes, messy homes, clean homes. But he had never been in a home that felt like this. It was like walking into a photograph, a two-dimensional representation of what a house should look like, created by someone who had studied houses but never actually lived in one. A costume of a home, worn by someone pretending to be normal. Mike continued through the house, his unease growing with every room. A bathroom with unused guest towels and a bar of soap still in its wrapper. A guest bedroom that looked like a hotel room. Bed perfectly made, nothing on the nightstand, nothing in the closet. A home office with a desk and a computer, but no papers, no files, no evidence of actual work being done. Every room was the same, clean, organized, and completely devoid of personality. There were no magnets on the refrigerator, no notes scribbled on a pad by the phone, no random junk accumulated in drawers, no signs of hobbies, interests, relationships, or the thousand small details that accumulate when a person actually lives somewhere. Mike had investigated burglaries where he could learn more about the victims from their messy homes than he was learning about this man from his pristine one. It was like the house itself was hiding something, keeping its secrets locked behind that facade of normalcy. As Mike made his way toward the stairs, preparing to check the second floor, he stopped in the hallway and looked back at the living room. The TV still flickered silently, casting shadows across those perfectly arranged pillows, those carefully positioned magazines, those photographs of a man who was always alone. And for the first time that night, Mike felt something more than just the routine sadness of a death scene. He felt unsettled, disturbed, like he had stumbled into something he wasn't supposed to see, a performance that was meant for no audience. The smell upstairs was getting stronger, which meant that's where he would find the body. But part of him, a small, irrational part, didn't want to go up those stairs, didn't want to know what other secrets this house was keeping. He pushed that feeling down, gripped his flashlight tighter, and started climbing. He was a professional. He had a job to do. But with every step he took, that feeling in his gut got worse. This wasn't just a death scene. This was something else entirely. The stairs creaked under Mike's weight as he climbed to the second floor. With each step, the smell intensified. By the time he reached the landing, it was almost unbearable, that thick, sweet, rotting odor that sticks to the back of your throat and refuses to leave. Mike had smelled death before, more times than he cared to remember, but it never got easier. You just learned to compartmentalize, to push through it, to focus on the job instead of your churning stomach. The upstairs hallway was dark, all the doors closed. He counted 4 of them, probably a master bedroom, a bathroom, and 2 other rooms. The smell was strongest coming from the door at the end of the hall, which was slightly ajar. A thin beam of light escaped from inside, suggesting a lamp or computer monitor was still on. Mike approached slowly, his hand resting on his holster more out of habit than any real expectation of danger. Whatever was behind that door had been dead for a long time. He pushed the door open with his elbow, careful not to contaminate any potential evidence. The room was a home office, smaller than the one downstairs but clearly more used. A desk sat against the far wall, facing a window that was, like every other window in this house, completely covered. A computer monitor glowed on the desk, displaying a screensaver of generic nature photos. Mountains, forests, oceans, cycling endlessly in the darkness. And there, in the leather chair in front of the desk, sat the body. Mike had found what he was looking for, or rather, what was left of it. The man was slumped forward, his head resting on the desk beside the keyboard, one arm hanging limply at his side. He had been dead for at least 2 weeks, probably closer to 3. The decomposition was advanced, the skin discolored and bloated, the features barely recognizable as human. Not a pleasant sight, but Mike had seen worse. From what Mike could observe, the death appeared to be natural. No visible wounds, no signs of struggle, no indication that anyone else had been involved. The man's posture suggested he had been sitting at his computer when it happened, maybe a heart attack, maybe a stroke, something sudden that gave him no time to call for help. His right hand was still resting near the mouse, like he had been mid-click when his body simply gave out. A sad ending, but not an unusual one. Every year, thousands of people die alone in their homes, undiscovered until a neighbor notices the smell or the mail piles up. That's just the reality of modern life, especially for people who live alone, who don't have family checking in on them, who could disappear for weeks without anyone noticing. Mike figured this was one of those cases. A lonely man, a quiet death, a body that sat undiscovered until it couldn't hide anymore. But Mike still had a job to do. He needed to identify the deceased, locate next of kin if possible, and officially report the death. Standard procedure. He pulled out his notebook and started looking around the office for any identifying documents. The desk was surprisingly organized, a cup of pens, a small lamp, a few folders stacked neatly to one side. No personal photos, Mike noticed, just like the rest of the house. He checked the folders first, hoping to find some paperwork with a name on it. Utility bills, maybe, or bank statements. The first folder contained tax documents from the previous year. The name on them, Richard Bellamy. Mike wrote it down. The address matched the house he was standing in. So far, so good. Richard Bellamy, presumably the man decomposing in the chair next to him. At least now he had a name to put on the report, a name to give to the coroner, a name to search for next of kin. Mike continued searching, looking for anything that might lead him to family members or emergency contacts. A wallet sat on the corner of the desk, and he carefully opened it using a pen to avoid touching it directly. Inside, he found a driver's license confirming what he already knew, Richard Allen Bellamy. Date of birth showing him as 58 years old. Address matching this location. The photo on the license was hard to compare to the decomposed body, but the general features seemed to match. There were a few credit cards in the wallet, all in the same name, and about $60 in cash. No photos of loved ones tucked behind the plastic sleeves. No business cards with emergency contact information. No insurance cards listing a primary care physician. Just the bare essentials a person needs to function in society, nothing more. Mike frowned. Even the loneliest people usually have something: a gym membership, a library card, a faded photo of someone they used to know. This wallet felt curated, intentional, like everything else in this house. At this point, I'm thinking, lonely guy, no family, sad ending. Case closed, right? That's what Mike told me when he recounted this story. He was ready to call it in, report the body, let the coroner take over, and move on with his night. It was almost 2 a.m. by now, and he still had several hours left on his shift. The paperwork alone would take at least an hour, plus waiting for the coroner to arrive, plus whatever other bureaucratic nonsense comes with an unattended death. He was already mentally preparing for it, already thinking about the coffee he would need to get through the rest of the night. Just another sad story, another lonely death, another name that would be forgotten by next week. Mike reached for his radio to call dispatch, but before he did, he decided to check the desk drawer. Just a quick look, in case there was an address book or something that might help locate family. He pulled open the top drawer, and that's when everything changed. The drawer was mostly empty, which wasn't surprising given how sparse the rest of the house was. A few pens, some paper clips, a stapler. But in the back corner, there was a small stack of documents that immediately caught Mike's attention. They were held together with a rubber band, separate from everything else, like they had been deliberately set aside. Mike carefully extracted them and started flipping through. The first document was a birth certificate. The name on it was Richard Allen Bellamy, same as the driver's license, same as the tax documents. But the date of birth was different. Not by much, just a few months off, but different nonetheless. That was strange. Why would someone have a birth certificate that didn't match their driver's license? Mike kept looking. The next document was a social security card, again with the name Richard Bellamy, but the number seemed wrong somehow. He couldn't say exactly why, but something about the formatting looked off. And then he found the third document. It was another driver's license, different state. This one was from Florida, not Ohio. The photo was clearly the same man, maybe a few years younger, but the name was different. The name on this license was David Allen Kern. Mike stared at it for a long moment, his tired brain trying to process what he was seeing. Why would Richard Bellamy have a Florida driver's license with a different name? Identity theft? A legal name change? Some kind of mix-up? None of those explanations felt right. Mike looked back at the body in the chair, then down at the 2 licenses in his hand. Same face, 2 different names. One man with 2 identities. Suddenly, this wasn't a routine death scene anymore. Suddenly, Mike wasn't so sure he knew who the dead man actually was. He set down the documents and pulled out his radio. But instead of calling the coroner, He called for a detective. Something was very, very wrong here, and he intended to find out what. Mike didn't touch anything else after finding those licenses. 23 years on the force had taught him to recognize when a situation was above his pay grade. He secured the scene, stepped out of the office, and waited in the hallway for backup to arrive. It took about 40 minutes for Detective Sarah Chun to show up, along with a forensic team that would process the scene properly. Mike briefed her on what he had found: the body, the pristine house, and most importantly, the 2 driver's licenses with the same face but different names. Chun listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When Mike finished, she looked at him and said something he would never forget. "You know, in 15 years of doing this job, I've never had a welfare check turn into an identity case." Neither had Mike. But here they were, standing in a dead man's house, about to discover that the dead man might not be who anyone thought he was. The forensic team worked through the night, documenting everything. Every surface was photographed, every item cataloged, every potential piece of evidence bagged and labeled. Mike stayed on scene, partly because he wanted to see this through and partly because Chun asked him to. He was the first responder, and she might need his observations later. Around 4 in the morning, one of the forensic techs called out from the office. He had found something behind the bookshelf, a small wall safe that had been hidden from view. The safe was old but sturdy, the kind you might buy from a hardware store to protect important documents from fire or theft. It wasn't locked, which struck Mike as odd given how careful this person seemed to be about everything else. Maybe he never expected anyone to find it. Maybe he never expected to die. Or maybe, after 14 years of keeping secrets, he had simply gotten complacent. Whatever the reason, the safe was open, and what was inside would blow this case wide open. Chun pulled on a pair of latex gloves and carefully removed the contents of the safe. There were 2 distinct bundles of documents, each wrapped in plastic bags to protect them from moisture. The first bundle contained everything related to Richard Bellamy, the identity the dead man had been using: a passport, a birth certificate, a social security card, tax returns going back over a decade. All the paperwork you would need to exist as a person in modern America. But when Chun examined them closely, she noticed the same inconsistencies Mike had spotted earlier. The dates didn't always line up. The signatures varied slightly from document to document, and the birth certificate, supposedly issued in Ohio in 1961, had a watermark that wasn't introduced until the mid-1990s. These weren't original documents. They were forgeries. Good forgeries, the kind that could fool most people, but forgeries nonetheless. Whoever Richard Bellamy was supposed to be, the man in that chair had built that identity from scratch. The second bundle was smaller but far more damaging. It contained documents related to another name entirely: David Allen Kern, a Florida driver's license expired in 2008, a birth certificate from Miami dated 1963, a social security card with a different number than the Bellamy documents, and a passport, also expired, with the same face that stared up from Richard Bellamy's license. The same man, captured at different ages, living under 2 completely different identities. Chun spread the documents out on the desk, creating a timeline in her head. David Kern's documents all expired around 2008 or 2009. Richard Bellamy's documents picked up right around that same time. It was like Kern had stopped existing and Bellamy had suddenly appeared, fully formed, ready to start a new life. The transition was too clean to be coincidental. This wasn't identity theft in the traditional sense. This was identity replacement. David Kern hadn't stolen Richard Bellamy's credit card or hacked his bank account. He had become Richard Bellamy, completely, permanently. But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. At the bottom of the safe, underneath all the identity documents, Chen found a manila folder that had been sealed with tape. She carefully cut it open and pulled out the contents, a collection of newspaper clippings, all from Florida publications, all dated 2009. The headlines told a story that made Mike's blood run cold. Local man missing after boat found adrift. Search continues for Fort Lauderdale. Resident, Family pleads for information on missing brother. And the name in every single article was Richard Allen Bellamy, the real Richard Allen Bellamy. The articles described a 53-year-old man who had gone fishing alone on his small boat in early 2009 and never returned. The boat was found drifting 2 days later, empty. No signs of struggle or foul play. After weeks of searching, the Coast Guard concluded that Bellamy had likely fallen overboard and drowned. His body was never recovered. The case was eventually closed, and Richard Bellamy was presumed dead. Chun held up one of the newspaper clippings, and Mike leaned in to look at the photo accompanying the article. It showed a middle-aged man smiling at the camera, standing on what looked like the deck of a boat. And the moment Mike saw that face, he knew. He knew with absolute certainty that the man in that photograph was not the man decomposing in the chair behind him. The real Richard Bellamy had a rounder face, a different nose, a mole on his left cheek that the dead man didn't have. They were roughly the same age, roughly the same build, but they were not the same person, not even close. Mike looked at Chun, and Chun looked back at him, and for a moment neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. The evidence was laid out in front of them, telling a story that neither of them wanted to believe. David Kern had been living as Richard Bellamy for 14 years, and the real Richard Bellamy had conveniently disappeared right before that new life began. I want you to understand what I'm saying here. I need you to really grasp the weight of what Mike had discovered in that office. The man who lived in this house for 14 years was not who everyone thought he was. The neighbors who waved at him, the postal worker who delivered his mail, the woman who played cards with him every Thursday, they all thought they knew Richard Bellamy. A quiet man, a little reserved, but friendly enough. The kind of neighbor you don't think twice about. But Richard Bellamy didn't exist. He was a fiction, a fabrication, a mask worn by someone else entirely. David Kern had taken a dead man's name, his social security number, his entire identity, and built a new life on top of it. He had been wearing a dead man's life like a costume, walking around in it, living in it, growing old in it. And no one had ever suspected a thing. For 14 years, a ghost had been living on Maple Ridge Drive, and now that ghost was dead, leaving behind nothing but questions. Mike stepped back from the desk and took a deep breath. Through his mouth, always through his mouth in situations like this. His mind was racing, trying to piece together what all of this meant. David Kern had assumed Richard Bellamy's identity in 2009, right after Bellamy disappeared. That couldn't be a coincidence. The newspaper clippings proved that Kern knew about Bellamy's disappearance, had followed the story, had kept a record of it. Why would you keep articles about a missing person unless you had something to do with their disappearance? The implication was obvious, even if the proof was circumstantial. David Kern hadn't just stolen Richard Bellamy's identity. He had probably created the circumstances that made that identity available. He had probably killed him. And then he had sailed into Bellamy's life like nothing had happened, leaving the real Richard Bellamy somewhere at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. It was the perfect crime. Until a welfare check and a strange smell brought it all crashing down 14 years too late. Part 7. A verdade sobre David Kern. The investigation into David Kern began the moment those documents were discovered. Detective Chun put in calls to the FBI, to Florida law enforcement, to every agency that might have information on a man who had apparently vanished into thin air in 2009. What came back over the following days painted a picture of someone far more dangerous than a simple con artist. David Allen Kern had been born in Miami in 1963, the only child of a single mother who died when he was 19. No siblings, no extended family to speak of, no roots tying him to any particular place. He had drifted through his 20s and 30s, never holding a job for more than a year, never staying in one city for too long. On paper, he barely existed. A few tax returns here, a lease agreement there, the occasional traffic ticket. But when investigators started digging deeper, they found a trail of destruction that spanned decades and crossed state lines. The first red flag came from Georgia. In 1992, David Kern had been investigated for insurance fraud in Atlanta. He had taken out a life insurance policy on a business partner, and when that partner died in a suspicious car accident 6 months later, Kern collected nearly $200,000. The investigation couldn't prove foul play. The accident looked legitimate enough. Bad weather and a sharp turn. But the insurance company flagged it as suspicious and added Kern's name to an industry watch list. He left Georgia shortly after, relocating to Louisiana, where he reinvented himself as a real estate investor. That venture ended in 1996 when he was accused of defrauding elderly homeowners out of their properties through forged documents and fake liens. The case fell apart when the key witness, an elderly woman who had lost her home, died before she could testify. Kern walked free, but his name was starting to accumulate a pattern. Then came the homicide charge. In 1998, David Kern was arrested in Texas for the murder of a man named Gerald Foster. Foster was a retired accountant who had been found dead in his Houston apartment, strangled with an electrical cord. Kern had been seen entering the building on the night of the murder, and his fingerprints were found inside Foster's apartment. It looked like an open and shut case. But then things started to unravel. Evidence went missing from the police lockup. A witness who had placed Kern at the scene suddenly recanted her statement, claiming she had been mistaken. The prosecution's case weakened day by day, and eventually the charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence. Kern walked out of the courthouse a free man. 3 months later, he disappeared from Texas and was never seen there again. Gerald Foster's murder remains unsolved to this day. No other suspects were ever identified. The pattern was clear to anyone who looked closely enough. David Kern was a predator who targeted vulnerable people, the elderly, the isolated, those without family or friends to notice when something went wrong. He would insert himself into their lives, gain their trust, and then take everything they had. Sometimes that meant their money, sometimes their property, and sometimes it seemed their lives. But Kern was smart. He never left enough evidence to be convicted. He always managed to slip away before the walls closed in, reinventing himself in a new city, starting the cycle all over again. By 2008, he was living in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, working as a financial consultant, a vague title that probably meant he was running some kind of scam. That's when he must have crossed paths with the real Richard Bellamy, and that's when he saw an opportunity too perfect to pass up. Richard Bellamy was the ideal target. 53 years old, never married, no children. His parents had passed away years earlier, and his only sibling, a brother, lived across the country and rarely kept in touch. Bellamy worked from home as a freelance accountant, interacting with clients mostly through email and phone. He owned a small boat that he took out fishing every few weeks, always alone. He was, in every sense, a man who could disappear without anyone immediately noticing. And that's exactly what happened. In March of 2009, Richard Bellamy took his boat out for what should have been a routine fishing trip. He never came back. The boat was found drifting 2 days later, empty, with no signs of what had happened. The Coast Guard searched for weeks but found nothing. Bellamy was declared presumed dead. His bank account sat untouched. His house in Florida was eventually sold to cover back taxes. And slowly, the world forgot that Richard Bellamy had ever existed. Except David Kern didn't forget, because David Kern had been waiting. Within months of Bellamy's disappearance, a man claiming to be Richard Bellamy showed up in Ohio. He had all the right documents: a driver's license, a social security card, a birth certificate. He bought a house on Maple Ridge Drive with cash, telling the realtor he was relocating from Florida for health reasons. He kept to himself, didn't make waves, became the perfect invisible neighbor. No one questioned him. Why would they? He had identification. He paid his bills on time. He never caused any trouble. He was just another middle-aged man living a quiet life in the suburbs. The fact that he was wearing the identity of a dead man, a man he had almost certainly murdered, never occurred to anyone. Because that's not the kind of thing that happens in places like Maple Ridge Drive. That's the kind of thing that happens in movies, in crime novels, in stories you tell around a campfire. Not in real life. Not in your neighborhood. But the most damning evidence was found in the basement. While the forensic team processed the upstairs, another group was searching the rest of the house. Behind the water heater, tucked into a dark corner that would be easy to miss, they found an old leather suitcase covered in dust. Inside that suitcase were items that didn't belong to David Kern. A wallet containing the driver's license and credit cards of Richard Allen Bellamy, the real Richard Bellamy, the man from the newspaper clippings. A watch with an inscription on the back, "To Rick, love always. Mom?" A collection of photographs showing a man who looked nothing like the corpse upstairs family gatherings, fishing trips, a younger Richard standing next to an older couple who were probably his parents. And at the bottom of the suitcase, wrapped in a plastic bag, a single gold wedding band. Bellamy had never been married, according to the records. So whose ring was this? Another victim, perhaps. Another life that David Kern had consumed and discarded. 14 years. Let that sink in for a moment. For 14 years, David Kern lived on Maple Ridge Drive as Richard Bellamy. He went to church on Easter and Christmas, sitting in the back pew, nodding politely at the other congregants. He waved at his neighbors when he checked the mail, exchanging small talk about the weather, the local sports teams, the rising cost of groceries. He played cards with Mrs. Patterson every Thursday evening, letting her win sometimes because it made her happy. He shoveled his driveway in the winter and mowed his lawn in the summer and put up a small American flag on the 4th of July. He did everything a normal person would do in a normal neighborhood. And the whole time, every single day for 14 years, he was living in the skin of a man he probably killed. Sleeping in that man's identity, spending that man's money, breathing air that should have belonged to someone else. The neighbors thought they knew Richard Bellamy. They didn't know anyone at all. They knew a performance, a lie with a heartbeat, a monster hiding in plain sight. The investigation into David Kern continued for months after his body was removed from that house. FBI agents, Florida detectives, cold case specialists, they all took their turn trying to piece together the full story of who this man really was and what he had done. They searched databases, cross-referenced missing persons reports, dug through records that hadn't been touched in decades. And what they found only raised more questions. David Kern had likely been using fake identities since his early 20s. Richard Bellamy wasn't his first victim. He was just the most successful transformation. There were at least 3 other suspected identity thefts linked to Kern, all involving men who had died or disappeared under suspicious circumstances. But without bodies, without witnesses, without Kern alive to interrogate, proving anything was nearly impossible. The evidence was circumstantial at best, suggestive but never conclusive. The justice system requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt. David Kern had been careful enough to ensure that proof would never exist. The case of Richard Bellamy, the real Richard Bellamy, was officially reopened in early 2020. Florida authorities reviewed the original investigation into his disappearance, looking for anything that might have been missed the first time around. They found plenty of red flags that should have been caught back in 2009. Bellamy's boat had been wiped clean of fingerprints, which was unusual for someone who used it regularly. His wallet and phone were never found, despite an extensive search of the waters where the boat was discovered. And there had been reports of a second person on the dock the morning Bellamy set out, a man matching David Kern's general description, but those reports were never followed up on. In hindsight, it all pointed to foul play. But hindsight doesn't convict anyone. Without a body, without a murder weapon, without a confession, Richard Bellamy's death remains officially classified as presumed drowning, circumstances undetermined. David Kern was never charged with his murder, and that's where the story ends. Not with justice, not with closure, but with a question mark. David Kern died of a heart attack in October 2019, alone in a house that didn't belong to him, wearing the identity of a man who had been dead for over a decade. He took his secrets with him to the grave, the full truth about what happened to Richard Bellamy, about the other people who may have crossed his path over the years, about the countless lies that made up his entire adult life. The coroner ruled his death natural causes, which feels almost absurd given everything we know about him now. There was nothing natural about David Kern. He was a predator, a parasite, a man who survived by consuming other people's identities and discarding the remains. And in the end, he simply stopped breathing, his heart giving out without warning, robbing his victims of any chance at answers. Some people say that's karma. Mike doesn't see it that way. He says it just feels unfinished. Mike retired from the force about 8 months after that night. He had been planning to work another 2 years, but the Bellamy case changed something in him. He told me he couldn't look at his patrol route the same way anymore. Every house he passed, every neighbor he waved at, he found himself wondering what secrets they might be hiding. Who were they really? Where did they come from? Were their smiles genuine, or were they masks concealing something darker? That kind of paranoia isn't healthy. Not for a cop, not for anyone. So Mike turned in his badge, took his pension, and tried to move on with his life. He bought that fishing boat he had been dreaming about. He spent more time with his daughter and his grandkids. He did all the things retired people are supposed to do. But he never fully escaped that night. Some part of him is still standing in that doorway, staring at those photographs of a man who was always alone. The house on Maple Ridge Drive was sold about a year after Kern's death. The estate had no legitimate heirs, David Kern had no family, and Richard Bellamy was a fiction, so the property eventually went to the state and was auctioned off. A young couple bought it, first-time homeowners excited to start their lives together. They repainted the exterior, tore out the old carpets, planted new flowers in the beds out front. They have no idea what happened there. Why would they? The records were sealed. The case never made the news. And nobody on Maple Ridge Drive talks about the quiet man who used to live at number 1422. Mike drives past that house every day on his way to the lake. He sees the new curtains in the windows, the toys in the front yard, the minivan in the driveway. Normal life, normal people, living where a monster once hid. Sometimes he wants to stop and warn them. But warn them about what? The monster is gone. Only the memory remains. Sometimes I wonder, and Mike wonders too, how many David Kerns are out there right now, living next door to someone, mowing their lawns on Saturday morning, making small talk at the grocery store, smiling at the mailman like they don't have a care in the world. How many people are walking around wearing identities that don't belong to them, living lives they stole from someone else? We'd like to think we would notice. We like to think that evil has a face, a smell, something that would tip us off. But David Kern proved that's not true. He was boring, forgettable, the kind of person your eyes slide right past without registering. He had perfected the art of being invisible, of being so unremarkable that no one ever thought to look closer. And that's the scariest part of this whole story. Not what he did, though that was horrific enough, but how easily he did it. How completely he fooled everyone. For 14 years, a killer hid in plain sight, and nobody suspected a thing. Not until that call. So here's what I want you to take away from this story. Not just the creepy details or the shocking twists, but the underlying truth beneath it all. You don't really know the people around you. Not completely. You know what they show you, what they want you to see, the version of themselves they've decided to present to the world. But behind closed doors, behind those smiling faces and friendly waves, there could be anything. I'm not saying everyone is hiding something terrible. Most people are exactly who they appear to be, but some people aren't. Some people are wearing masks so convincing that even they might have forgotten what's underneath. And you'll never know which is which. Not until something breaks the illusion. Not until a neighbor notices a smell. Not until a welfare check reveals the unthinkable. We trust so easily. We assume so much. Maybe that's human nature. Or maybe it's just the lie we tell ourselves so we can sleep at night. All right, that's the story. The story of Officer Mike, of David Kern, and of a man named Richard Bellamy who disappeared one day and was replaced by a stranger wearing his name. I want to thank you for sticking with me through this one. I know it was heavy. If this story affected you the way it affected me, do me a favor. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Did you see the twist coming? What would you have done in Mike's position? And most importantly, how well do you really know your neighbors? While you're down there, make sure you're subscribed if you aren't already, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next one. We've got some wild stories coming up, and trust me, you don't want to be late to the party. Until next time, stay safe out there, watch your back, and maybe, just maybe, pay a little more attention to the people living right next door. You never know who they really are. I'll see you in the next one.